Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome for our 13th and 21st Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Donald Rumsfeld.
It's hard to break old habits. Every time I see an admiral, I look down to see if my shoes are shined. Thank you so much, Admiral. Shipbuilders, men and women of the crew of the USS Gerald R. Ford, Susan, these wonderful members of the Ford family here in the first row, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. 7 years ago this month, I phoned President Ford to wish him a happy Thanksgiving. He sounded fragile. And Joyce and I decided to fly out to California and to see him, kind of sensing that it might be his last Thanksgiving. He was weakened and he was in a chair, couldn't move much. But when we came to the door, he greeted us with this shout of welcome. He was still strong and a friend, a good friend. He beamed when I took a hat like these USS Gerald R. Ford hats, baseball caps, and put it on his head and gave him a sketch of what this amazing aircraft carrier would look like. As it happened, my link to Gerald Ford began with an aircraft carrier many, many decades before. A ship, I suppose, that not only much smaller would probably fit on a third of this flight deck. In 1944, the USS Monterey was one of several ships in the Third Fleet, hit hard by a violent typhoon in the Pacific that took out, as I told, 3 destroyers and over 150 naval aircraft. A team worked 7 punishing hours in something approximating 100-knot winds to keep the Monterey afloat. And at the head of the fire brigade was an unassuming attorney from Grand Rapids who'd volunteered to join the Navy after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Gerald R. Ford. A decade or so later, that ship, the Monterey, was stationed at Pensacola, Florida. And as a budding naval aviator, I made my first 6 carrier landings aboard the USS Monterey. That was June 5th, 1955. And it means something to me that the carrier I landed on was the same ship whose history was intertwined with the man I came to admire and respect so greatly. 8 years later, in 1963, I would have the privilege of serving with Jerry Ford in the United States Congress, an institution he loved. He helped make history by working to achieve passage of the historic civil rights legislation of the 1960s, and then made history again a decade later when he assumed the vice presidency and then the presidency of our country in a time of crisis and calamity. That day, the new president observed that he came into office at that time in 1974. It was a time of enormous pressure and high stakes. Our enemies were searching for weakness, so our president, he had to be strong. Our institutions were shaken, so the president had to be decisive. And our people were reeling from mistrust, so the new president had to be open and candid. President Gerald Ford was all of those things. He was a man of courage and solid values, and I know that the men and women who sail this ship will bring those same qualities in their service to our nation. It's fitting that the USS Ford is the first new class since the Nimitz-class carriers. In the first year of his presidency, Gerald Ford spoke at the commissioning ceremony of the USS Nimitz. That day, the new president observed that a naval vessel is a symbol of the person whose name she bears. He said one of the things he was proudest of, that he could say that I served under Admiral Nimitz in the Pacific, unquote. And today I know something of how he felt, because one of the things I'm proudest of, that I can say I served with President Gerald R. Ford. May God watch over the officers and the crew who will serve aboard this great ship. And may God bless the nation and this ship's namesake, loved and served so well. Thank you.